One of my favorite things about theme parks is when they try to make you feel like you're really somewhere else. Somewhere magical or different, and not just surrounded by outdoor roller coasters and flat rides. Not that that isn't fun in and of itself. Amusement parks have their own distinct atmosphere that's really special. But I love when they take the extra step to add a sense of wonder. That's why I love dark rides so much. Something else that has long fascinated me is rides of the past. Things you and I will never experience, and can only be gleaned through photos, videos, and the memories of others. Once again, it sparks the imagination. This grab bag video is going to be about defunct rides. Ideally, ones on the more obscure side that you might not have heard of. Some of them are scarcely documented, some are cheesy and laughable, and a few are totally insane. Either way, I'm hoping you'll find something new and interesting here. Our first stop is the Lewis and Clark Big Adventure at Oaks Amusement Park in Oregon. Given that their famous expedition ended in Oregon, I understand why a local theme park might want to capitalize on their story. The ride was formerly the Haunted Mine, which I can find very little information on. This cheapo dark ride looks pretty bad, but it's bad in an endearing sort of way. The hokiness gives it a what the hell is going on kind of charm. We open on plywood figures of Lewis, Clark, and their dog Seaman. The real Seaman was a black Newfoundland, but I guess that wouldn't show up too well in such a dark ride. When I say dark, I'm not kidding. There are a few videos of this ride, but the lighting is so dim that there are several large sections where you really have to strain to tell what's going on. Of course, a video can never fully capture the real experience, but I have a feeling that actual riders weren't getting much out of this one either. The ride is largely made of plywood and painted set pieces, depicting scenery like mountains, rivers, and animals. There are a few three-dimensional figures as well. One is an eagle with a strobe light flashing on it to give it some illusion of movement. There's also what appears to be a native shaman with a moving arm, dimly illuminated by some fire. The high point of the ride, if there's one to speak of at all, is a bear that slightly lurches at riders and then sort of hops up and down. After about 90 seconds of this kind of thing, the riders find themselves settled at Fort Clatsop with Lewis, Clark, Sacagawea, and their dog. But the ride's not quite over yet. They next pass a strange-looking spacesuit. It's meant to be Neil Armstrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually just a prop they had left over from something. This ushers guests into the final room, meant to inspire them to have their own great adventures. The ride ends on a weird note, rather than the optimistic one that was probably intended. The attraction closed in 2013, replaced by a kids' play area. I'm not sure how many people miss it, but as I said, I find something charming about this one in a so bad it's good kind of way. Our next ride, Lumalusion, opened in 1979 at the Texas State Fair. The cartoony exterior was inspired by the works of legendary dark ride designer Bill Tracy. Inside, there were a few classic touches, like a fake truck startling guests with a blaring horn, but it was otherwise very unique. Instead of trying to get scares and laughs out of the riders, the goal seemed to be to create a trippy experience. Guests passed a seemingly endless tunnel covered in lights, an impressive mirror display, and a room lined with foil, all set to Pink Floyd music. Those who experienced the original version remember it fondly. In 2011, the ride was rethemed and named Scary Park. A good deal of the interior remains the same, but now there are monsters added to the displays. Although it's a similar experience, I've seen people lamenting the loss of the original, purely surreal version. The removal of the Pink Floyd soundtrack is also viewed as a major downgrade. What really piqued my curiosity, I'll admit, was this wizard animatronic that used to stand outside. Based on its movements, it was easy to identify as a retrofitted Rolf de Wolf from the Rock-afire explosion. Although I couldn't find one in the videos, there was apparently a little dragon that was a retrofitted Earl Schmerl. Elsewhere, retrofits of Beach Bear, Mitzi, and Duke performed outside a haunted house as the Boo Band. I can't find any good quality photos at the moment. The only Rock-afire character that can currently be seen at the State Fair is the Sun, who now sits atop the Bubble House as a talking clock. I wonder if he knows the guy at FAO Schwartz. I don't believe I've ever mentioned him on this channel, but I love the Tintin series. I've read all the comics, even the unfinished final one. For 20 years, Tintin was heavily featured in his home country at Walibi, Belgium. When the park opened in 1975, it had a number of Tintin attractions, including a dark ride. The ride was based on the book Prisoners of the Sun, where Tintin travels to South America to save his friend, Professor Calculus. Guests sat in boats and drifted through scenes from the story. These scenes included a spitting llama, Tintin and Captain Haddock making a campfire, and Tintin, Haddock, and Calculus about to be sacrificed to the Incan gods. The ride was apparently not up to snuff. It had capacity issues and some safety concerns. One time the ride stopped, and instead of waiting, guests got out of their boats to find an exit themselves, damaging some of the sets. It closed in 1980, with a new, more elaborate dark ride opening in 1981 in a different part of the park. This attraction was based on one of Tintin author Hershey's favorite stories, The Secret of the Unicorn. Specifically, it focused on the story of Haddock's ancestor and his battle against the dreaded pirate Red Rackham. The ride is clearly inspired by Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean. After an intro scene where Haddock narrates the story to Tintin, guests are taken back in time and find themselves caught between two warring ships. Based on the interior pictures we have, I believe this ride closely followed the story in the comic. Hopefully someday, some actual footage of the ride will surface, but as is often the case, what we have is better than nothing. There were also a few outdoor Tintin rides that are worth mentioning, because when else will I be able to talk about them? A simple mechanical pony ride based on Tintin in America took guests around some western scenery. Similarly, a Jeep ride was themed to the Shooting Star. An outdoor river ride was drawn from Disney's Jungle Cruise. Just like the Disney attraction, this ride was not based on just one jungle, but several jungles that Tintin has explored. It contains scenes from Tintin in the Congo, The Broken Ear, The Cigars of the Pharaoh, and Prisoners of the Sun. In 1995, the rights the park had to Tintin expired, and the characters were removed. Certain attractions were rethemed, like Lucky Luke taking over the pony ride. The Secret of the Unicorn became a seasonal haunted walkthrough. The recognizable Tintin characters were removed, and the remaining pirates were hacked up, decapitated, and splattered with blood. From what I can tell, the attraction is no longer there, not even the Halloween version. Today, Tintin fans can only dream of such an experience. One of the best places to find information on closed dark rides is laughinthedark.com. I could have potentially taken everything in this video from that site, but that would have been lazy. Instead, I'm just going to focus on a couple of rides they covered that really interested me. This one, and then a mill chute that we'll be discussing shortly. I'm also taking some information from the equally helpful Dark Attraction and Funhouse Enthusiast website. It should go without saying that if you find any of this interesting, you need to give them a visit. Freedomland USA opened in New York in 1960 and only operated for 4 years. When they closed, several of their rides were sent to other theme parks. Our main subject, Tornado, was moved to the Great Escape, where it remained until 2002. Outside of Laugh in the Dark's article and one home video, we have no record of the ride's interior. Honestly, like the previous Tintin rides, it's nice we have something at all. Guests board an antique car and ride along the countryside. The peaceful evening is quickly shattered when a tornado hits. Fans hidden in the ride create real wind, strong enough that in the only current footage of the attraction, the ride operator even tells the cameraman to take his hat off first. Riders find themselves caught in the storm, with livestock, hay bales, and even an outhouse swirling around them. The quick but thrilling experience ends in a wrecked barn. What's really interesting about this ride is that it functions like an old-fashioned pretzel ride, the kind that whirls around dark corridors with supernatural surprises around every corner. But instead of having monsters and ghouls, the ride deals with a truly scary natural phenomenon. Not everyone believes in ghosts, but you can't say the same thing about tornadoes. Because of this, the ride has an especially eerie vibe that I don't often see. Another Freedomland dark ride is even less documented, but worth a mention. Earthquake, also themed around a natural disaster, was moved to Cedar Point after Freedomland's closure, where it ran until 1984. Aside from a few pictures of the exterior, some audio recordings, and guests' memories, we don't have too much on this one. The ride opened with a mechanical fortune-telling wizard predicting an earthquake. The wizard, by the way, appears to still exist in storage. After that, riders travel through Chinatown in San Francisco. Dancers are seen in a nightclub window, and a drunk is tossed out of a bar. The earthquake suddenly begins, and buildings appear to topple toward guests. Fires and floods break out, with fire trucks arriving to help. At one point, a stereotypical Chinese man pops out of a trash can. A couple guests also remember there being a dragon at the end, but they might be getting their rides mixed up. Then again, this ride did open with a wizard, so who knows? There is currently an earthquake-themed ride in Gatlinburg, Tennessee that involves a gorilla or something, but it's completely unrelated. Disney did not invent the dark ride, but they did create some of the most well-known examples. Their Fantasyland attractions probably come closest to a classic dark ride experience of the older days. But did you know that some Disney characters existed in theme parks before Disneyland? Kennywood has graced Pennsylvania since 1898. One of their horror-themed funhouses opened in 1937 with a mouthful of a name: the Old Haunted Castle at 13 Spook Street. When World War II broke out, It was decided that nothing could outdo the real horrors in the world. Spook Street was revamped into the lighthearted Daffy Club. That's Club with a K. The club featured a few familiar faces. Static figures of Geppetto and Pinocchio were placed inside. There was also a large inflatable duck that strongly resembled Donald in his fighting stance. Meanwhile, over at the Noah's Ark Funhouse, which still exists today, there was a gag involving Dopey popping out of a trash can, making the same kissing face he gave Snow White. I don't know if Walt Disney had any objections or even knowledge of these stunts. This was the early 40s, before he ever seriously considered building a theme park. The props were built by the Philadelphia Toboggan Company. Coincidentally, a carousel they built in 1917 is now being used in Walt Disney World. Sometime in the mid to late 50s, the Dopey, Geppetto, and Pinocchio props were moved over to Hersheypark. No word on what happened to the duck. The Kennywood refugees were placed in the Mill Chute. In the vein of future classics like Splash Mountain and the Timber Mountain Log Ride, guests would float through scenic tunnels before going down a flume for a Wet and Wild finale. There didn't seem to be much theming. Pinocchio and Geppetto were reportedly placed near the entrance, and a photo from inside shows Dopey randomly stuck in front of some artwork that would not fly today. The Mill Chute would be rethemed in 1964 to the Lost River. The ride now had a jungle theme, and featured bats, ghosts, some explorers tangling with a crocodile, and the most interesting feature, a voluptuous Nile Queen who sat on a hippo singing "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles." To top it all off, soap bubbles continuously flew out of the hippo's ears. The ride was closed for good in 1972 after flooding from Hurricane Agnes. So I'll admit I fudged that part a little. There were some Disney characters present, but you couldn't call any of those Disney rides. Our next attraction will make up for that. Now, this attraction is technically defunct. Tivoli World, a Spanish theme park, is currently closed. There are plans to reopen it, but nothing definitive at the time. For the sake of this video, we are going to count the dark ride as closed, even if there's more hope for it returning than many others on the list. The ride, simply called Pinocchio, is ostensibly based on the book. However, the appearances of the characters are so close to the Disney version specifically that it would be ignoring the obvious not to point it out. Geppetto even has a kitten and a fish that are very similar to Figaro and Cleo. In the book, he only had a cat. Outside of the blatant copying, the most interesting thing about the ride is its speed. It feels more like an indoor kiddie coaster with elaborate theming than a traditional dark ride. The scenes have an admirable amount of detail, but it doesn't really register with guests because they're moving through them so quickly. I had to slow down the footage to get a good idea of what was going on. The ride begins in Geppetto's workshop. The toy maker is in bed with a fairy hovering over him, something lifted from the Disney movie and not the story. This is followed by some scenes on the streets outside. Pinocchio and his cricket, who, for legal reasons we cannot call Jiminy, are accosted by either a fox or a cat. It's hard to tell. He is next seen performing for Stromboli, which was the Disney version of the character's name. Take what I said about legal reasons a second ago and forget it. After a quick drop, riders find themselves in Toy Town, the ride's version of Pleasure Island. They're really inconsistent with the names here, since this is actually closer to the book where the area was called the Land of Toys. Suddenly we're underwater, riding right into the whale's open mouth. So, Storybook Land. The final scene has Geppetto and Pinocchio safely out of the whale's belly. Pinocchio has become a real boy, so this ride has actually done one thing better than Disney. At the end of their ride, Pinocchio is inexplicably still a puppet. Talking about Disney knockoffs, not to mention Spain, makes a decent segue to our next ride. Shima Park Village is an amusement park in Japan with a Spanish theme. One of their current dark rides is Don Quixote's Magical Flight, which has a ride system very similar to Peter Pan's flight. You even sit in little ships. The ride looks pretty charming, with figures reminiscent of the ones in Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls. There's a scene with windmills at the beginning, because if you're doing anything with Don Quixote, it's legally required that you include windmills. We're not focusing on that one, we're looking at the ride it replaced, Donkey's Cherry. I learned about this a few years ago from the blog Passport to Dreams Old and New. I'll link that post, because it highlights some other crazy dark rides that I'm not mentioning here. I recommend you check out their entire page for some in-depth, well-written articles on the glory days of Disney World. The ride takes us through a world of whimsical, albeit creepy, anthropomorphic donkeys at a Spanish vineyard. The first section is dedicated to their debauchery. We see them making wine, getting drunk, and dancing. As is often the case in these rides, the merriment of that first minute does not last long. A donkey executioner towers over riders with an axe, and a donkey witch conjures up evil spirits. Conquistador donkeys set the city on fire. That's already a little reminiscent of Pirates of the Caribbean, but the scariest is yet to come. It seems that the designers threw the Pinocchio and Mr. Toad rides in a blender because we find ourselves in Donkey Hell. As flames surround us, we are greeted by a massive, absolutely terrifying donkey demon who appears to be chomping down on one of the wine barrels. All is not lost, however. Like Dante, we rise out of hell and toward heaven. A donkey rides through the clouds on a bottle. A band that was playing earlier sails on a ship across from him, happy as can be. The ride ends on a cheerful, dreamlike note. Except that's not quite the end. The final scene shows a realistic, non-anthropomorphic donkey eating some oats. Was this all a dream the donkey had after watching its human masters partying? Honestly, that's the craziest part of all, which is really saying something. There have been a lot of insane dark rides over the years, but Donkey's Sherry is a special kind of madness that we rarely get to see. We're staying in Japan for our next ride. If you're a fan of this kind of thing, you might be familiar with the Sally Corporation, also known as Sally Dark Rides. They've been manufacturing animatronics and dark rides since 1977. Some of their creations are pretty well known, like the Justice League ride at Six Flags, while others are more obscure. One of them, Zombie Paradise, would have totally fallen through the cracks if not for the Sally Corporation themselves. Their website has information, photos, and professionally shot video of the experience. Zombie Paradise opened in 1992 at the Tokyo Dome complex. The ride takes guests through a macabre hotel staffed by trolls, goblins, and ghouls. The owner is King Zombie, and big surprise, he wants you to stay forever. Riders pass through the torture chamber, which concerningly leads directly into the kitchen. It seems guests at the Hotel California, the Zombie Paradise, get tenderized before they get cooked. Now this seems like fairly standard stuff for a haunted attraction. It's high quality, it has a good dark sense of humor, and it has some nice details, but if it was just this, I don't think I would have much to talk about. But then, about 2/3 into the ride, we get to the centerpiece that sets this one apart from its contemporaries. We enter the discotheque. A zombie band, the Deadbeats, performs an original song with their three-headed, and I'll say it, three-breasted, backup singer. And how could I forget the undead breakdancer? After that welcome musical interlude, it's back to business. King Zombie and a few monsters sit at a dinner table. The waiter offers a severed head under a platter, but the table is mostly empty. It would appear that the riders are next on the menu, which means it's time for an escape. Making a hasty exit, riders look up to see the king standing on an arch above them. In a last-ditch effort to capture them, he transforms into a monstrous bat and swoops down. I'm guessing the video doesn't quite do this one justice. It probably looked great with the ride's actual lighting. I love the idea of putting a monster dance party in the middle of an otherwise conventional dark ride. That, coupled with a bat transformation at the end, elevates Zombie Paradise into something truly unforgettable. In recent years, the Sally Corporation has been commissioned to do a number of somewhat generic shooting gallery rides. They look nice and seem to be crowd pleasers, but I think rides like Zombie Paradise and Mine of Lost Souls show just how creative this company can be when given the freedom. I hope to see more attractions like these in the future. I can't find any information on when Zombie Paradise closed, but Tokyo Dome currently has a more adult-oriented haunted walkthrough. Our final attraction isn't really a dark ride, but it comes so close that I think it's worthy of inclusion. It also features the Muppets, including a performance by Jim Henson himself, so that alone means it's worth talking about. The Plymouth Muppet Traffic Safety Show was a traveling ride sponsored by Chrysler. Instead of appearing at amusement parks, the attraction was installed in a number of shopping malls in the late 80s and early 90s. Kids sat in a slow-moving van and stopped at several scenes with animatronic Muppets. In each scene, a different Muppet would sing "Play It Safe" about road and pedestrian safety. We're lucky enough to have a video of this attraction online. Kermit was naturally the first character kids met, dressed as a security guard. Next was Miss Piggy outside an ice cream shop with penguin customers. She sang about looking both ways before crossing the street. I feel like Piggy would consider this show beneath her. I wouldn't be surprised if Kermit had to bribe her for this one. Robin the Frog sits in a van, most likely a Chrysler product, with his Frog Scout troop. They sing about the importance of seatbelts. After that, Fozzie tries to tell a "why did the chicken cross the road" joke, but the chicken is waiting for the walk signal, which is taking a long time. Gonzo, who's acting as the cameraman, explains that the chicken is doing the right thing by being patient. Of course, Gonzo has straight up flung himself into traffic in the past, but he cares deeply about the safety of chickens. The final scene is back with Kermit at a movie theater. The screen shows the real Muppets performing "Play It Safe" one last time. Then the kids are on screen for a fun little surprise. In the days before everyone had a smartphone, this was a real novelty. Kermit gives an obligatory, "Yay!" and the ride ends. There were a couple other scenes in this experience that the video does not show. One scene features penguins getting off a school bus. Another has Animal almost driving into traffic on a tricycle. There was also a scene with Beaker and possibly Bunsen since he appears in the movie at the end. I'm not sure if the camera person just didn't film these, or if they weren't included in this version. I imagine that different malls had different sized spaces allotted. We do have an overhead shot of one of the setups, and it seems rather small. I think that these extra scenes I mentioned were only used if they had room, but don't quote me on that. Although the ride is not spectacular, it's an interesting look at Muppet animatronics before the Disney theme parks. The animatronics are simple and don't move that much, but they look very good and are completely on model. The kids in the video seem a little bit restless at times, but I'm sure many children enjoyed getting up close with these characters. I'm happy we have a video of this ride, and I'm surprised there's not more footage at the moment. I feel like there has to be somewhere. Part of the reason many defunct dark rides don't have many videos is because camcorders used to be large, cumbersome devices that would have been difficult to handle in certain places. Plus, dark ride lighting was not ideal for filmmaking. Trying to get a good shot in the dark, twisting, turning, briskly moving ride was not easy. The Muppet Traffic Safety Show was plopped in the middle of a shopping mall where it was very easy for parents to stand still and film the entire thing taking place. Hopefully more people have home movies that they can share someday. Remember, if you like this video and want to learn more about these kinds of rides, be sure to check out some of the websites I mentioned. I'll include them in the description. Thank you, as always, for watching.